I'm in Cornwall for the G7, which means I have a beautiful view of the sea. Laura has her own private political editor balcony with her own even better view. And Chris, you're out of the cupboards.
I am. I didn't get a ticket to Cornwall, but hey, I've got an upgrade to the main studio in here on my own. But it's a joy to be here. It's so snazzy this compared with my little box down the corridor.
Do you want to see what lovely Cornish snacks I've got?
All right, there's no cliche underdone on this podcast. So let's have a look at your bounty.
These are 3 G7 special pasties from Pengenna Pasties in St Ives, where the summit is being held. Shall I take you through them?
I'd love to hear it in excruciating detail.
This is going to sound disgusting. This plate is so heavy. These pasties are massive. Right, the first one is a Big Biden, which is basically a normal Cornish pasty, but just bigger because it's American.
What makes it normal? What's in a normal Cornish pasty?
Steak and potato. Pretty nice, but pretty classic.
Have you got some water there?
Laura, you gutted you're missing out on this.
Are you eating on camera, Adam? I can't see you, but I can hear chomping. And it's not something that I ever really planned to do. But I haven't had anything to eat since breakfast, and we're recording at 7:10. So you're kind of making me quite jealous, but we've been running around all day. Is it nice, though? Is it good?
Well, the Big Biden was pretty nice, but as I said, it was just a classic Cornish pasty. This is the one I'm really excited about. This is a Boris Johnson, and it's Stilton flavoured. This
is Adam's Ed Miliband bacon sandwich moment.
Stilton and what? You see, I do love a cheese and onion slice.
Stilton in a pasty is surprisingly nice.
Adam, I'm not sure that the call's going to come for you to do the MasterChef food critique. I think the vocabulary was a bit limited, if I'm honest. I got myself a Cornish pasty on the way in, so I didn't feel like I was missing out. And there was lots of references to hand-crimped pastry, which is a wonderful phrase, isn't it? You hear that word crimper often pops up in the tabloids associated with posh hairdressers. Anyway, hand-crimped pastry. You didn't make a single reference to the pastry, Adam. I'm very, very disappointed. Anyway, bring one of them back. Might not be so good by Monday morning. Welcome to Newscast.
Newscast. Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam at the G7 summit in Cornwall.
And it's Laura down the hill a little bit on a balcony in St Ives, because I couldn't get back into where you were, Adam, because the whole place was in lockdown. So here we are.
And I'm Chris, here in the main Newscast studio, having had, as I say, an upgrade. But I'm on my own. No ticket to Cornwall for me.
And because having 3 people in 3 different places wasn't enough, we thought we'd add a fourth in a fourth place. And I'm pleased to say it is Lord Kim Darroch, who used to be our man in Washington, our ambassador to the US. Hello, Lord Darroch.
Good evening.
So obviously the star attraction at this summit before it starts is Joe Biden making his first foreign trip as US president, and he's chosen the UK. Kim, is that kind of a diplomatic coup? Is that something that Boris Johnson is going to be celebrating, that he kind of got bagged the first visit?
I'm sure the Prime Minister will be really happy that Biden has made his first foreign trip to the UK. It's a real coup for him. But there's quite an element of luck in this, because he's come because we are hosting the G7 summit. And had we not been hosting it, I'm not sure that Biden would necessarily have come first to London. But look, Boris Johnson may be a lucky Prime Minister, but it's good news for the UK as a whole.
Laura, you've had such a busy day today, you couldn't even grab a bite of a Cornish pasty for your lunch. Do you want to just talk us through some of kind of like the iconic Boris Biden stuff that we've seen already?
Well, it's a huge moment of history, really, when you see any first encounter between any American president and any British Prime Minister. You know, it fills a page of the history books, just the fact of the meeting happening itself. I think there are lots of reasons, though, why actually today's meeting is really meaningful. Is one, you've got a sort of drawing a line on both sides about the end of the Trump era. Now, we know that Boris Johnson had a real affinity with President Trump, and Lord Darroch certainly knows all about that. But after the meeting between the two, Boris Johnson said to us it was a breath of fresh air dealing with Joe Biden, because there's so many areas where the two countries want to work together, whether that's COVID, climate, all sorts of things. So I think that makes today really matter. I think the other reason why this whole shindig, frankly, really matters is that it's the first time that any of these world leaders have seen each other properly since the terrible pandemics that have washed across the world. And there is this real opportunity for the UK to make this a sort of, I mean, I suppose to use a fancy jargon word, an inflection point. You know, a moment where the world's biggest democracies would say, OK, the last year or so, it's sort of been every man for themselves. Now we want to get together again and show what can be done. Just lastly, if you want another little moment of more gossipy history, it was the first big public appearance of the new Mrs. Johnson, who strolled along the beach casually with Joe Biden and the two. Interesting to see the choreography of that, and was also captured by some of the snappers and eagle-eyed camera people walking on the beach barefoot with baby Wilfred and Dr. Biden after the meeting.
Yeah, and so we got lots of those pictures that will just play on the news for years and years to come of them doing the pointing across the beach, and just in the corner of the shot was the Prince of Wales, the aircraft carrier. And the reason the Prince of Wales was here was because back in 1941, Winston Churchill sailed to the US to see President Roosevelt on the Prince of Wales, the ship that existed then, and they signed this thing called the Atlantic Charter, which was all about how the UK and the US were going to work in the kind of post-war world. And what's happened today in Cornwall is that Biden and Boris Johnson have signed a new version of it, a 2021 edition, about how the two countries are going to cooperate on kind of the modern challenges. And here is how the president described what it means.
80 years ago, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin Roosevelt signed an agreement known as the Atlantic Charter. It was a statement of first principles, a promise that the United Kingdom and the United States would meet the challenges of their age, and they would meet it together. Today, we build on that commitment with a revitalized Atlantic Charter, updated to reaffirm that promise while speaking directly to the key challenges of this century.
Lord Darroch, I wonder what you make of this Atlantic Charter stuff. And tell us a bit about President Biden. I've been rereading your book today, Collateral Damage, and one of the lines you have to describe him when you met him was to describe him as being unstoppably talkative.
First of all, the Atlantic Charter is a very clever idea. I'd like to know whose it was. And it's very striking for me, Chris, that the Americans were prepared to mark this first meeting with this gesture, because it's quite a big gesture for them. And it sort of creates echoes of Roosevelt and Churchill, which is great for one of Churchill's biographers, one Boris Johnson. So I'm really struck that they have done it. The Atlantic Charter back in 1941 actually had a big impact in charting the immediate course of post-war history. We'll see if this one has the same impact, but it's a really positive gesture. On Joe Biden, look, he comes from a very modest background, son of a used car salesman, brought up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which was sort of an archetypal Rust Belt town through the 60s and 70s and 80s, and now it's doing rather better. And he is a lifelong politician. He was, to be frank, a pretty average student at college, but he got into politics very early, was an extremely young to be elected senator, and he had 40-odd years in the American Senate, where he made his name as a moderate, doggedly working across the aisle, trying to do deals with Republicans to get things done. Rather different from the sort of firebrand, radical liberals, younger liberals of the modern Democrat Party. Ran 3 times for the president, 3rd time presidency, 3rd time lucky. Barack Obama was vice president for 8 years. It's a remarkable story in this way, it really is. It's a sort of fulfillment of the American dream.
And Lord Darroch, it's a very different political journey and story, certainly, to Boris Johnson. But one of the other things that Joe Biden has had as a huge part of his career, his interest in Ireland. I was reminded today by some of the people here actually how active he was during many of those early years about trying to sort of bring rapprochement, but also trying to, very much trying to push some of the Irish agenda when he was in DC. And now the White House has made no secret of their alarm over what's going on in the standoff between the EU and the UK over the Northern Irish Protocol. But the early soundings from the meeting between the two today suggest that actually there wasn't any real clash over it. There was just a sort of real reminder of the intent that people had to push on, they had to get this sorted out, and everybody had to be, on all sides, be very serious about the Good Friday Agreement. Do you think actually there are serious ructions over this behind the scenes, or would Biden actually have been more emollient?
I think the Biden message, I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right, Laura, that he is a lifelong member, I'm sure, of the Friends of Ireland caucus in the US Congress. Had an Irish mother, very proud of his Irish ancestry. And I think he has signalled throughout his presidency, right from his first phone call to Boris Johnson, that he is going to watch the Irish protocol issue very, very closely. I never thought that he would want to take sides publicly, not against the UK, not against the EU on this issue, because I think he has in the back of his mind that there may be a possible need for US brokering efforts somewhere down the line. And that's best done in private and best done if you haven't burnt your bridges with either party. But I expect he's done today, what he's done is signal his close interest to the Prime Minister, stressed how closely he is following it. And his message, I think, basically has been, you need to sort this out. Not attributing blame one way or the other, but saying to keep the Good Friday Agreement whole and sound and safe, we need to sort this out quickly. And, that's where the Americans will be. They will hope that we in the EU, between us, can find solutions to the trade issues that have come up because of this border in the Irish Sea, that we can do that quickly and that we can move forward on the basis of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which the Americans have said they support. So the message will be, get this sorted.
And it's really interesting just watching through the week how this issue has crept closer and closer to the G7 agenda, even though it doesn't feature anywhere on any of the G7 agenda documents or any of the many, many panels and working sessions they're going to have here. And it's sort of kicked off actually on our sister podcast, Americast, when Sopel and Mateless interviewed Jake Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor, and he made this comment on this.
The UK and the EU need to work out the specifics and the modalities on that, need to find some way to proceed that works both for the EU and the UK. But whatever way they find to proceed must, at its core, fundamentally protect the gains of the Good Friday Agreement.
And then there were a couple of newspaper stories about various leaked documents and notes and things that seemed to kind of up the ante a little bit. Then we had the bilat between Boris Johnson and Joe Biden. And then you had the Prime Minister coming out of that meeting. And as Laura said, sounding kind of pretty relaxed about how it had gone on this subject.
America, the United States, Washington, the UK, plus the European Union have one thing we absolutely all want to do, and that is to uphold the Good Friday, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and make sure we keep the balance of the peace process going. And that's absolutely common ground. And I'm optimistic that we can do that.
And what is really interesting is if you look at the last bit of that Atlantic Charter we were talking about a minute ago, there were two clauses about Northern Ireland. And they talk about the signatories to the Good Friday Agreement, and they talk, which are the UK and Ireland, and they talk about the UK and the United States working together to help Northern Ireland and promote peace. There is no mention of the EU, who are not a signatory to the Good Friday Agreement. And so I wonder if Downing Street will be really happy with that tonight, because there is no kind of strong arming by the US to say sign up to what the EU interprets the protocol to mean. So I think number 10 will be quite pleased with that. Although chatting to EU people here at the summit, because bearing in mind there's going to be loads of EU leaders and presidents of EU institutions, the theory they put forward was that, okay, that gets Boris Johnson through the first couple of hours with Biden, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this disappears from the agenda over the next couple of days, because there's going to be loads of people here who still want to talk about the protocol in Northern Ireland. Now, Laura, let's talk about stuff that's not about the protocol, and let's talk about stuff that is on the agenda. What do you think are the big things that are going to come out of this very big meeting?
I think there's tons, actually. It's a massively ambitious agenda. There's loads on it. So there wants to be big international commitments on vaccines. They want to make some progress on the climate deal, particularly, remember, the UK's got another big international jamboree in November, the COP26 in Glasgow. So I think there's some quite important groundwork that they want to get done here this week on that. But I think more than anything else, actually, it's not so much the agenda items. What Boris Johnson also wants to do, not just with the G7, but also what he calls the D11 football team, because don't forget, South Korea are going to be here as well, Australia is going to be here as well, India is going to be dialing in too. So you actually got 11 countries in the margins getting here. It's to say to the world, after a terrible year, and also after the turbulence of the Trump presidency, who wasn't very interested in countries doing together, he wants to say the democratic big guns are back, and they're determined to work together. And when they do work together, really good things can happen. And the interesting thing, when we'll be talking about this in a few days' time, is whether that really massive ambition actually, by Monday, feels anything like having been achieved. So I think it's more than any of the individual items. I think it's that overall message that sort of diplomacy for democracies is back. And yes, it can actually make a difference to lots of people's lives in a good way.
Lord Darroch, before you go, I'm going to ask you a sort of bigger picture question if we take a step back from all of this. And it picks up from what you were saying, really, which is the importance of leaders physically getting together in the same place. So the importance of these summits, huge shindigs that they are in getting people together face to face in terms of building trusts and relationships. But then also, inevitably, the vagaries of the weather. And again, I find myself delving back into your book. And I wouldn't have necessarily thought of this particular picture from 1964 as having a diplomatic bearing upon the events of today and where the president was or wasn't able to go in the end. But I spot a picture in your book, Kim, of your brother and I standing in front of a dormobile on holiday in Cornwall, summer of 1964, you write. Note the clothing appropriate to a Cornish summer. And for our podcast listeners, you are wearing what looks like a remarkably thick duffel coat on top of several other layers. And I suppose President Biden had a little experience of that with, I think, Laura, the cancellation of this whole business of going to St Michael's Mount.
The poor staff who've been choreographing this event for months had this plan that President Biden and Boris Johnson were to meet dramatically for the first time on St Michael's Mount, which is kind of over the other side of Cornwall. And, you know, don't get in touch. My geography of this part of the world is not great. I'm probably pointing the wrong way, but it's not over there. And it's an amazing little island that the tide sometimes allows you to go out to and sometimes not. And they had this amazing plan, and the aircraft carrier was meant to be in the backdrop. But the Cornish weather did for the whole thing. Grey skies were down and they didn't take the risk. So they had this meeting, and the pictures were a stroll along the beach in the still very beautiful Carbis Bay. But it wasn't quite the drama. And all the presidential helicopters who'd been practicing landing on the island didn't get to test out their manoeuvres.
Oh, and to think, Kim, you could have told them this 50 years ago.
Christian, I remember that holiday, that 1964 holiday, very well, mostly for the fact that it rained every single day in August in Cornwall. This didn't put me off Cornwall because my wife and I now own something the size of a small garden shed on the south coast of Cornwall and spend quite a lot of time here. And what Laura describes as the Cornish weather you've experienced now is, I would say, absolutely typical. I mean, 4 seasons inside the day is the normal thing, but if it's less than 4 seasons, the one we'll miss out is summer. Really. So the Bidens are getting classic Cornish weather. But just on the G7, there have been, as all of you journalists know, some very unremarkable G7 meetings in the past where it's been difficult to find a story or a real outcome that makes a difference to people. I think this one can be different because the issues they're addressing, global economic recovery after the pandemic, a global vaccination program, because we will not be through the challenge and the threat of COVID until a lot more of the world is vaccinated than America and Europe, and climate change are 3 big challenges that affect everyone's lives. And if this G7 can find some answers and can start to pave the way towards global cooperation which really addresses these challenges, then it would have been one of the most significant G7 meetings in recent times. So that's a real challenge, but a real target for the Prime Minister, but for all the other participants at this meeting. It can be a meeting which doesn't just relaunch cooperation amongst the community of democracies, but which really relaunches the G7 as a body, as an institution, as an event that changes history.
And Kim, just before you go, I've got a little challenge for your diplomatic skills so we can see if they're still up to scratch. You've had quite a tricky relationship with Boris Johnson in the past. Do you think he's actually turning out to be actually quite a good diplomat and quite a good performer on the world stage?
Do you know, that's interesting. What I think about Boris Johnson is, having been, maybe Laura and Chris weren't surprised by the strength of his election victories a couple of months ago. But I think one of the things that the Biden team will have noticed is how well Johnson does as a politician when he faces elections. They may have concluded we want a good relationship with this guy because he's going to be around. But I think he's still to be tested in terms of his international diplomacy skills, and how he handles this summit and how he handles the COP26 summit will be major tests for him. He has the charm, he has the empathy, he has the personality to carry it off, but you also need to command the detail and to know all the substance. I'm not saying he hasn't done his homework and read his briefs, but I think people will be looking to see evidence that he has. But if he has, he can really make his mark at this summit.
Your Excellency, as we should call ambassadors, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us on Newscast.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Now, Chris, Laura and I have been running around buying all the Cornish pasties that are available in all the flavours that are available. But at Westminster today, Matt Hancock was kind of doing the return grudge match against Dominic Cummings, because it was now the Health Secretary's turn to speak to the committees that are investigating COVID after the Prime Minister's former chief advisor lobbed so many grenades in his direction when he was doing it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah,
it felt like the second half. So whilst there was lots of attention inevitably gravitating towards you guys and half the planet in Cornwall, there was a big day here at Westminster. It felt big on any day, with, as you say, Matt Hancock appearing in front of a select committee, the kind of retaliation, if you like, rhetorically, coming from that marathon session that Dominic Cummings did a little while back. And it was pretty spiky and pretty obvious that there wasn't a vast amount of love between Messrs Cummings and Hancock. Let's have a little listen to a little bit of it. Mr Hancock giving evidence, as I say, and asked specifically about his relationship with the former chief aide in Downing Street.
Did you know that he wanted the Prime Minister to fire you?
Yes, because he briefed the newspapers at the time.
Right.
Or somebody briefed the newspapers. I now have a better idea of who it was.
And did you raise an objection to that?
Yes, of course, and I had the Prime Minister's wholesome support all the way through.
Not only that, but another cutting little remark, which had the feel, I don't know if you heard this, Laura and Adam, but had the feel of one that maybe, did he try it out in front of the shaving mirror this morning? I don't know. He observed rather archly that he felt that the government had been functioning rather better in the last 6 months. So, and when did Dominic Cummings leave government again? Oh yes, about half a year ago.
Those two sort of remind me a bit of a cat fight from Dynasty, but don't ask me which one's the Alexis and which one's the Crystal. But Laura, does this make you think that actually a couple of weeks ago when Dominic Cummings gave his evidence, it looked like this is a disaster for the government. It's like the COVID inquiry started now and they got everything wrong. Actually, it hasn't sort of ended up that way, really, has it?
Well, I think it was a sort of disaster on the day, but I think there were lots of things that meant for the government it didn't yet turn into a dragging on disaster. Number one is that Dominic Cummings' own reputation with the public is not exactly that great. Number two, so far, and he may yet do this, he's promised to do it. He hasn't sort of come out with reams and reams of evidence that he says proves everything that he said. but also in that funny way around the pandemic. I think many members of the public want to look forward. They don't necessarily want to go over everything that happened. And also a lot of people have already sort of formed their view of what happened. There's already been so much about what went wrong in the early bits of the pandemic. His evidence on the day was no question really explosive, really tricky, but also just news moves so fast now. And the sort of lack of love between Matt Hancock and Dominic Cummings in Westminster was no secret. And it sounds as if, having not followed it that closely today, but it sounds as if Matt Hancock sort of managed to get through it. But, Dominic Cummings today has also made it clear that he's going to start a little newsletter. He's been out there online saying that there may well be more things that he has to say. So I think, as ever, just as people sort of say, oh, Boris Johnson's really done it this time, it's really terrible, I think anybody who tonight, and then it turns out not to be, I think anyone who thinks tonight that we'll never hear anything from Dominic Cummings again might also have the wrong end of the stick.
Evidence suggests he's not a man who's going to disappear quietly off the face of the earth. You two, before you go and before we go, talk us through Friday at the summit. Adam, first, what's happening?
Oh, so this is when all the leaders start arriving, like Charles Michel and Justin Trudeau are here in Cornwall already, and then we'll get the others arriving tomorrow. And I think the thing to look out for tomorrow is pledges on how many doses of vaccine the rich countries here are going to donate to the poorer countries elsewhere. So look out for the number and also the period over which those donations are made, because people like the Wellcome Trust and UNICEF are saying there should be 1 billion doses this year. So check out the number and the duration. That's my advice when that announcement comes tomorrow.
And Laura, the summit rolls on all weekend?
It does, and as well as vaccines, there are going to be talks about climate change, there's going to be talks about the economy. I imagine some of the meetings between European leaders and Boris Johnson, that Northern Irish issue is bound to come up again. But I also wouldn't be surprised if we might see the odd visit or little contact from perhaps some people who are even more perhaps important or more senior dignitaries than world leaders. Might be the odd person popping in the next day or two.
Oh, that's a proper tease with which to end, isn't it? That is to it. Start with
Which
the Cornish
celebrities
pasty
have got strong links with Cornwall? Dawn French.
Well,
that's a celebrity with a strong link to Cornwall. Is that what you're getting at, Laura?
Well, whoever it is, I might try and get this microphone in front of them. I'm sorry, I couldn't make our special newscast microphone work on my kind of grey balcony. But doesn't mean that we didn't have it with us. My spoffle was with you in real life as well as in spirit.
Yeah. That's all right. I'm just excited about the prospect of French and Saunders coming to the G7 summit. I hope I'm not disappointed. Oh, and before I go, it's a summit, so of course there is some swag. This is where it gets like an ASMR video as I open the plastic bag. You can now get a G7 UK 2021 Carbis Bay face mask.
Now our talking is over. You can put it on.
Yeah.
Marvellous.
Right, thanks.
That is a
must-have
accessory.
And thank you to all the... Yeah, exactly. How does it look? Does it keep the rain off? That's my main question. But thanks to you guys for tonight's podcast. Thank you to you two for listening. And also thanks to all the newscasters who happen to be in St Ives this week and have been saying hello as I walk down the street buying pasties. It's been lovely to bump into you. Right, bye, guys.
Newscast is big in St Ives. Bye.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.